March 12, 1944, east of Smolensk, 0520. The morning began without color. Frost still held to the rails, a thin crust that broke under the weight of the men's boots. The mist was low, caught between the freight cars and the skeletal cranes, turning the world into layers of pale smoke. Beyond the sidings, engines muttered in sequence, 6 trucks, canvas-covered, exhaust whispering into the fog. Their heat shimmered faintly, a sign of life in a field otherwise fixed in silence. Sergeant Leonid Kravchenko stood beside the launch frames. Half buried, rimed with ice, they looked more like scaffolds for a forgotten bridge than weapons. He rubbed his gloved hands along the steel, feeling where the frost ended and the weld seams began. The sideways ladder, as they called it, 6 rails angled not forward, but canted toward the horizon, each tube crossing the next by degrees. A device no manual had approved, no commander had requested. He built it during night shifts, welding by lantern, when orders were slow to arrive. The radio whispered static, nothing else. He adjusted the dial, slower this time, listening for pattern or tone beneath the noise. Faint voices bled through. German, or maybe local. The fog swallowed direction. He stepped closer to the mast antenna, tracing the lead wire like a tether to command. The signal came, vanished, then returned. Movement West Ridge. No coordinates, no code clearance, just breath between syllables. By rule, no action without verification. By rule, the convoy behind him remained idle, engines ready but mute. Fuel trucks, ammunition wagons, a dozen men with frost at their collars, each glancing toward Leonid's back, as if waiting for the air itself to decide. Diesel fumes rolled low, clinging to the thawed mud. Somewhere in the mist, a crow gave one dull cry, then nothing. He looked again toward the tree line. The horizon was violet, the color of a lamp's afterglow, a strange light for dawn. The wind shifted and carried a scent like burned rubber, distant but moving closer. He reached for his binoculars, but the glass was fogged, breath trapped inside. He wiped it once with his sleeve and froze. A faint shimmer beyond the ridge, not sunlight, not fire, the metallic glint of hulls. By the book, he should have waited. Every signal man in the chain had to confirm identification. The delay could mean minutes or an hour. He looked to the men, their faces pale under condensation, eyes fixed on him, not the frames. Behind them, the trucks trembled slightly with idle vibration, like an animal straining at the leash. He stepped to the switchboard, checked the fuse link. The launch rails hummed faintly as current bled into them, a sound like breathing through iron. The fog began to thin, revealing the outlines of tires on the far slope, German armor turning toward the supply line. He waited one more beat. No message came. The decision arrived quiet, almost procedural. A pull of the bois ignition lever. 6 flashes. The rails shook. Fire rolled sideways across the mist, dissolving shape and distance. The reports came seconds later, dull concussions swallowed by the air. By 05:30 a.m., the ridge was gone from view, only smoke. The radio cleared at last, calling ceasefire, too late to matter. When command arrived, they marked it as an unauthorized launch. No reprimand, no citation. Just silence entered into the log. The convoy was spared. The system resumed its rhythm. Trucks forward, rails cold again. In later months, his name disappeared from requisition orders, but the sideways ladder design reappeared across other units, standardized, uncredited. The line moved west. Supplies reached the front on schedule. War runs on timing more than courage. Steel obeys its own discipline. The field east of Smolensk never changed. Rusted frames, frost returning each dawn. Would you have turned the lever? Leonid Kravchenko was not a theorist. He came from Kharkiv, from a factory where turbines turned faster than thought, and error meant blood. The rhythm of steel shaped him long before war did. Every bolt, every bearing, demanded the same truth. The hand obeys the system, or the system stops. Before uniforms, before orders, he lived among that hum. He knew each motor's breath, each tremor of imbalance, as others knew voices. He rarely spoke. When he did, it was brief. Instructions, measurements, results. He kept to one corner of the turbine hall, near the drain that never cleared. There, under the leaking light, Oil gathered in a shallow pool. He smoked there, always one cigarette at the same hour, then returned to work without a word. War came. The workshop emptied. Machines were stripped for parts, men for ranks. Leonid's discipline did not change, only his tools. Where turbines once turned, launch frames now waited. The grease under his nails stayed the same. The sound of metal under strain stayed the same. Even the habit of silence stayed. In uniform, he carried the factory's order with him. Wrenches wrapped in cloth, bearings polished until they caught light, notebooks filled in block letters, square and without margin. He called the rocket racks workers, as though they shared his shift. The men laughed at that, but when night settled over the front, when the ground itself seemed to hum from distant artillery, they left him alone with his workers. He would sit beside the frames, gloved fingers tracing weld seams, counting seconds between wind gusts, testing the angle of rails against the frozen soil. By rule, every device was aligned to table and compass. Leonid used neither. He read the ground, slope, weight, frost. He had no faith in numbers that ignored what the earth felt like. His calculations were not written. They were remembered by touch. The angle of a finger across a hinge told him more than the manual ever could. His dilemma was not courage, it was correctness. The war asked for obedience. The field demanded instinct. Between those two orders, men vanished. He learned to wait for silence before deciding, silence of air, silence of doubt. When the field held still enough to hear his own breath, that was his measure. In his breast pocket, folded 3 times, was a letter. The paper had softened from sweat and handling. His sister's handwriting spoke of orchards near Poltava, branches heavy with dust, tractors still breaking the same clay that once stained his hands. She wrote of apples, of the sound of their fall. He read it each week, never aloud. Sometimes, adjusting a clamp or fuse, he caught the faint scent of fruit dust under the diesel and thought, for an instant, he was back there. Sun behind leaves, no sound but turning gears. That, too, was a form of calibration. The mind adjusting to distance, the hand steadying under memory. He measured not just arcs and fuse times, but what separated who he had been from what the system now required him to be. By winter's end, his men had stopped mocking the workers. They cleaned them as he did, logged their launches with the same precision. When one failed, Leonid did not curse. Machines, he said, respond to care, not command. The war did not shape his method. It only confirmed it. The same discipline that kept turbines spinning now kept convoys alive. The same quiet that once filled the workshop now filled the fog before each firing order. He believed that systems remember their makers. That steel, once trained to move correctly, carries that memory longer than men do. And when the night drew still, and only the hum of generators remained, he would sit again in silence, watching vapor drift from the launch tubes, each one cooling in sequence. A machine learns by repetition. A man survives the same way. Would you have trusted your hands or the order? The sideways ladder did not exist on any Red Army register. It was a rumor in steel, a field modification without paperwork, a design born from scarcity rather than doctrine. On the forms, his convoy was listed as Standard Artillery Support Unit, East Line Section 4. In truth, it was one fragile vein in a vast metallic body that stretched from Bryanna to Minsk, pulsing with movement day and night. The network functioned like breath. Fuel drums from Orel, bread crates from Smolensk, shell casings from Kursk. Each moved under a single logic. Deliver on time, or fail the front. Trains met trucks. Trucks met sledges. Sledges met men who carried by hand. Every delay rippled outward like a fault through ice. A missed hour could choke a division. A broken axle could starve a regiment. Leonid knew the system's rhythm the way a mechanic hears an engine. He could sense imbalance before it showed. Convoys were his machinery, columns of ZIS trucks groaning under frost, headlights dulled by soot, engines timed to start in sequence so no man froze waiting for heat. The drivers counted kilometers by instinct, not by map. They learned the pattern of potholes, the smell of fuel leaks, the sound of weak bearings. It was industrial memory carried in the body. In that order of things, improvisation was suspect. The Red Army trusted procedure above imagination. Creativity broke the chain of repetition that made the machine reliable. Yet Leonid's sideways ladder, 6 rails tilted at diagonal, solved a problem no regulation acknowledged. It could fire across a valley without repositioning. 6 launches from 1 pulse. No recalibration, no traverse. A mechanic's logic, not an engineer's. They called it a superstition, a worker's daydream welded in mud. The reports that mentioned it were stamped non-standard equipment. Higher command did not forbid it. They simply ignored it. But between the lines of authorization, it lived. A silent correction inside the grand machinery of war. Beyond Leonid's field post, the supply arteries kept moving. At 2 p.m. each day, the Bryansk depot logged outgoing tonnage. At 6 p.m., Minsk recorded what arrived. Between them lay hours uncounted. Mud, snow, missed signals. Men called it the gray zone, where timetables lost meaning. It was there, in that uncertainty, that Leonid worked best. Every evening, he checked the convoy manifests by lantern. The light trembled across stamped seals and pencil marks. Dispatches arrived late, sometimes smudged, sometimes torn. Each number meant pressure somewhere ahead. Battalions waiting for rockets that had not come. Trench lines running low on shells. He understood the moral weight of minutes. The system spoke not in words, but in figures. 1 drum short, 2 hours late, 40 men without cover. He read the reports without comment. Adjusted bearings, cleaned the rails, logged temperature and humidity. Routine was survival. The discipline of repetition was the Army's true strength. Not bravery, not slogans, but the unbroken chain of motion. By early March, signals from headquarters had begun to falter. The enemy had cut one of the communication lines near Orsha. Transmissions grew thin, like voices through water. Orders arrived late, sometimes reversed. Convoys doubled back on themselves. Men waited in fields for directions that never came. The machine had stuttered. On the morning of March 12, 1944, the fog thickened until the horizon vanished. The grid, that vast timed organism of rails and wheels, went silent. No verification signal, no coded pulse from command. For once, there was no voice of the system to follow. Leonid stood by his improvised launch rack, hearing only the soft ticking of a frozen clock. Behind him, the trucks idled under their tarps, fuel lines trembling faintly. Ahead, the valley waited unseen. In that silence, the system paused, suspended between control and collapse. It was a moment without regulation, without code, and within it, 1 man and 1 unregistered machine held the weight of the line. The system wins wars, but only if someone keeps it breathing. By 07:10 a.m., the frost began to loosen its hold. Drops slid from the truck hoods in slow rhythm, striking mud with a dull pulse. The sound aligned with the faint tapping in Leonid's head. Steady, mechanical, almost measured. The air, still half frozen, carried no birdsong. Only a low hum, far off, uncertain. It might have been wind against the tree line, or engines. The men around the convoy moved with rehearsed care. They spoke little. A cough, a boot scuff, the rattle of a wrench against a fuel drum. Each sound arrived distinct, as though amplified by the quiet. Their orders remained unchanged. Hold position, await signal. Routine preserved calm, but calm felt thinner now. The silence of procedure had begun to sound like waiting. At 07:17 a.m. the radio cracked once, 2 words buried in static. The signal was weak, the voice unfamiliar. Leonid turned the dial, found only snow noise. No call sign, no coordinates. The men looked over briefly, then back to their tasks. Tightening clamps, wiping frost from gauges. Leonid wrote the time in his notebook, underlined it twice. He turned toward the fog line beyond the ravine. The mist there had density, like breath held too long. It pressed outward, forming shapes that dissolved before recognition. He adjusted his gloves, stepped closer to the slope, and studied how the light fell. Uneven, pulsing faintly through moving haze. He could not see movement, only the suggestion of weight beyond it. Behind him, the column of trucks idled in sequence. 40 vehicles. Each one carried the next phase of the front. Shells, bread, fuel, bearings, paper maps. A chain of necessities stretched east to west. The convoy's heartbeat was low but steady, exhaust rising in uniform plumes. Every crate was an unseen man's margin of survival. The fuel drums began to sweat. Drops formed on the steel, rolled down, gathered at the seams. The men noticed, said nothing. The sun had no warmth, yet the metal seemed to remember heat from somewhere. The smell of diesel sharpened. Leonid checked the thermograph. The reading was normal. He tapped it once. The needle twitched, then held steady. A compass lay on the hood beside his notebook. When he opened it, the needle spun, once, twice, before finding north again. He watched it for a moment longer than necessary. He wrote nothing this time. The engines kept running, their sound layered into a low vibration across the field, a background tone that filled the space where orders should have been. A driver from the second truck stepped out, checked his tires, nodded toward Leonid, then climbed back in. He waited for instruction that didn't come. The fog deepened at the edges of sight. Somewhere in it, something moved, faint as fabric against a stone. Not men, not vehicles, just distortion, as if air itself was adjusting to an unseen force. Leonid traced the tree line again with his field scope. Nothing, only gray pressure, and the sound of engines counting seconds. By 07:30 a.m., no new transmissions arrived. The static settled into a quiet hiss, like breath through cloth. Leonid lifted the receiver once more, then set it down. He looked at the column, drivers' faces barely visible behind glass, waiting for clearance that might never come. He made one final mark in his notebook. Silence, duration uncertain. War often begins with the absence of sound. The small signals, frost drip, compass twitch, sweating drums, formed a pattern he could not yet name. Every system shows stress before failure, if one knows where to look. Still, the rules required patience. Still, no orders came. The fog thickened. The hum deepened. The grid waited for a decision that would not be written. At 08:45 a.m., the order arrived, or what passed for one. A fragment through static. The voice above Leonid's rank was distant, clipped, dry as procedure. Command delay. No action authorized. Wait. Verify. Conserve ammunition. The message repeated once, half swallowed by interference, then ended. No confirmation. The transmission carried the weight of doctrine, obedience shaped into sound. It was the kind of order written for distance, not for the edge of fog. Leonid listened until the static settled, then replaced the receiver. Around him, frost continued to retreat from the launch rails, steam rising in faint curls that dissolved into morning air. He checked the range again. The same figures reappeared, precise and undeniable. Enemy armor advancing through the mist, west flank, in the gap where two sectors met. No one's jurisdiction, no one's liability, the sort of space where war collected its unclaimed mistakes. He marked the coordinates in pencil, underlined once. Then silence. The column behind him idled on low throttle, exhaust drifting thin across the slope. A driver looked toward him, then away. No one asked. They already knew the sound of indecision. Leonid wiped a sleeve across the rangefinder's glass. The moisture smeared, but did not clear. Beneath it, the fog pulsed faintly, hinting at movement without form. He recalculated trajectory, elevation, wind, distance, 6 times. Each run produced the same outcome. If the line held, the first shell would strike before the armor cleared the ridge. He stood by the ladder launch, hand on the cold rail. The frost there was nearly gone now, leaving behind a faint line of water that caught the weak sunlight. He followed it with his eyes until it vanished beneath the fuse assembly. Instinct murmured. It did not shout. It reminded. He pressed his thumb along the fuse latch, habit more than readiness, and felt the metal's texture, fine-grained from years of wear. The weight of the mechanism had its own certainty. Machines did not lie, only obey. Procedure said wait. Verification pending. Authority unseen. Pattern recognition said otherwise. The difference between the two, between faith in system and faith in sense, had thinned to the length of a breath. He exhaled once, slow, counting, then began cleaning the ignition pin. Each rotation deliberate, each action measured. The ritual steadied him, like balancing turbines, like calibrating the rhythm of steel. The body found order, even when orders failed. The men nearby pretended to work. One adjusted his strap. Another inspected the mud on his boot. None spoke. Their stillness became a kind of acknowledgement. They, too, could feel the pressure building in the pause between decision and command. By 8:58 a.m., the fog thickened into one solid wall. The sound within it changed, deeper, heavier, layered with the faint grind of treads. The map's numbers had not lied. Leonid lifted the field scope. Nothing visible. Yet the air now had direction. Even without sight, he could measure movement by the vibration beneath his boots. He returned the scope to its case. The air was cold against his palms. He thought briefly of the phrase from training. No action without confirmation. The words had once meant safety. Now they sounded like delay. The rail assembly gleamed, ready. The fuse pin rested beside his thumb. The voice from command did not return. He looked west, toward the unseen armor, then east, where his convoy waited, unaware that silence had already turned into choice. In the stillness that followed, he realized the order had already expired, not through disobedience, but through time itself. He did not speak. He only moved his hand. Machines depend on motion. Systems depend on trust. When one fails, the other must decide. The frost was gone. The air held its breath. Would you have waited or acted? At 09:12 a.m., Leonid made the turn. No command, no clearance, only motion. His thumb pressed the ignition key down to its stop. The relay clicked once, dry, mechanical, before the engine coughed the breath that would light steel. Then came the sound. Not thunder. More like air forced through metal lungs. 6 projectiles left the rails in staggered rhythm, their departure clean and deliberate. The launch did not echo. It rolled outward, swallowed by fog. Trails of smoke bent sideways, veering into the whiteness, shaped by wind and imperfect design. The pattern was wrong. Not upward, like official diagrams, but wide, spread like an opened hand. Men turned instinctively, eyes narrowing against the haze. None spoke. The act had happened faster than the thought. For a second, there was nothing. The fog accepted everything, the roar, the light, the movement, and gave back only silence. Then came a delayed pulse through the ground. One, then another, each low and blunt, like heavy doors sealing in sequence. The air trembled. It was distant, but not far enough to dismiss. No one cheered. No confirmation arrived. The smoke thinned, revealing the ladder frames shuddering under the heat they had expelled. Paint blistered. Bolts clicked as metal cooled. The system he had built exhaled once and went still, as if exhausted by its own defiance. Leonid didn't move. He stood with gloves still on, fingertips gray from soot. The iron beneath his boots vibrated faintly, residue from what had just been released. He kept his eyes on the horizon, a horizon that no longer existed, only gradients of smoke. The men waited. One adjusted his helmet strap. Another tapped the receiver for signal, though everyone knew the frequency had been empty since dawn. The static remained open, carrying no words, only a faint, uneven hiss. The silence afterward felt heavier than the launch itself. By rule, the act was insubordination. By logic, it was timing. The order he had ignored still hung somewhere above them, traveling slower than consequence. The air carried the burnt scent of propellant, metallic and sweet. A thin layer of ash settled across the rail bed, coating boots, sleeves, faces. Every man there wore the same look, not of fear, but of suspended calculation. They waited to see if the fog would answer back. Leonid checked the instruments. One dial cracked. The alignment rods had warped slightly under recoil, but the frame held. The ladder, his ladder, had worked. The pattern he once sketched on ration paper had left the ground. Proof now existed, if only in the form of silence. A gust crossed the ridge, clearing a brief corridor through the smoke. For an instant, black columns could be seen rising in the distance, low to the west, slow, spreading, consistent with an ammunition strike. The fog closed again, swallowing the view. No message followed, no reprimand, no commendation, only the same unbroken line of static. The convoy behind him remained idle, engines ticking at idle heat. Somewhere along that line, a driver made the sign of the cross. Somewhere else, another began to write in his logbook, leaving the space for orders received blank. Leonid removed his gloves and placed them on the rail. The metal was still warm. He looked down the column, 40 vehicles, each holding its own silence, then back towards the place where the horizon had been. What he had done would be recorded as a technical anomaly, if it was recorded at all. The system preferred straight lines, and this act had been anything but. He knew what it meant. Procedure had stopped listening, so he had answered for it. The smoke lifted in slow fragments. The war moved on. The machine, as always, consumed everything: fuel, men, errors, instincts, until nothing remained but record. Would you have turned the key? By 10:03 a.m., the first reports began to move through the relay net, clipped, coded, delayed. Fragments of information traveling through wire and distance. The language was neutral, procedural. Enemy armor sighted west of the ravine. 6 vehicles disabled. No survivors to confirm. The coordinates matched precisely. The time matched as well. Why no 12 a.m.? The moment Leonid's rockets had vanished into fog. No one said his name. The record instead described combined fire from multiple batteries. A phrase shaped to fit the structure of command. Neat, sufficient, safe. Leonid read the communique twice. The words meant what they always meant: efficiency without attribution. He tapped the side of his clipboard with a pencil, the sound small and steady. A kind of mechanical metronome for thought. By 11:02 a.m., the convoy was ordered forward. Engines rolled back to life, coughing out the residue of morning cold. Wheels caught in thawed mud, grinding, then freeing with deliberate effort. Motion resumed. Routine reclaimed the rhythm. Men who had seen the launch did not speak of it openly. They returned to their posts, hands steady on wheels and levers. But in small exchanges, brief nods, quiet glances, something unspoken passed between them. Recognition without record. The ladder launcher stood cleaned now, stripped of exhaust soot and frost. Leonid worked along the rails with a wire brush, scraping off residue until bare steel reappeared. Each stroke left a mark, small, linear, exact. The work calmed him, Precision restored order where rules could not. Around him, the plane stretched flat under a dim sun. The fog had lifted, but left a haze that moved slow across the ground. A film of smoke, thin as breath, traced the western horizon. It did not rise. It drifted, the color of burnt oil. Elsewhere, field officers filed their reports. Their handwriting was precise, their language collective. Coordinated artillery response. Enemy advance neutralized. Lines stabilized. The system absorbed the event. The mechanism of credit turned without friction. The men who had stood by Leonid spoke of it only later, in half-statements and unfinished thoughts. The sound came from nowhere. The fog lit up, then went quiet. It wasn't official, but it worked. Their recollections had no form in paper, only memory. By nightfall, the plane was empty again. Tracks filled slowly with meltwater. Smoke dissolved into weather. The latter, now silent, caught the last light on its rails. Metal held heat long after fire. Leonid finished cleaning, stored his tools, and wrote nothing in the logbook. The column's record remained unbroken. 11 a.m. Convoy resumed. No delay reported. No one thanked him. No one accused him. The machine of war continued forward, indifferent but intact. Still, the air held the faint smell of iron and ozone, trace elements of combustion, proof of ignition. The kind of evidence that lives briefly, then disperses before inspection. Somewhere beyond the reach of the naked eye, 6 points on a map had been erased. Coordinates corrected, line redrawn. Whether it was accuracy or coincidence, no one would ever determine. The system did not audit instinct. Leonid remained at his post until dusk. The hum of departing trucks faded into distance. Static whispered through the receiver, but carried no voice. Only the rhythm of wind across open steel. The record ended clean. But silence, too, leaves a shape, one carved by consequence. Would you have waited for permission? 2 days later, Leonid was summoned to divisional command. The order came without explanation, printed in clean type, stamped once in blue ink. By 7:45 a.m., he stood inside the canvas tent, warm from stoves, smelling of wet wool and diesel. The exchange that followed was brief, measured, conducted under the grammar of protocol. The officer read from the folder without inflection. Your unauthorized launch shows no documented correlation with enemy losses. Therefore, no grounds for reprimand, no grounds for commendation. Each word fit tightly inside its bureaucratic casing. Leonid nodded once. There was nothing to add. The war ran on records. His action existed outside them. The officer closed the folder, slid it aside, and called for the next report. A clerk entered, pen already moving. The file was replaced before Leonid reached the flap of the tent. Outside, the air carried the damp weight of thaw. Ropes creaked against truck beds. Diesel burned slow in the distance. Men moved crates without speaking. The war, in its machinery, remained steady, supplies flowing, routes recalculated, errors digested by paperwork. The system had learned to keep its surface smooth. Leonid returned to the position by noon. The launch frame still stood where he left it, paint blistered from heat. He rechecked every joint, cleaned residue from the rails, and marked new alignment lines with white chalk. Precision again. Order restored through motion. The men around him worked quietly, eyes flicking once toward him, then away. No salute, no comment. Yet in silence there was something that resembled respect, or perhaps understanding. What he had done was both necessary and inadmissible. As daylight faded, he mixed fresh paint. The brush spread evenly across scorched metal, covering traces of the morning that had altered the line of battle. When finished, the frame looked unremarkable again. An object returned to its function, stripped of story. That night, under a half-moon, Leonid walked the perimeter. Frost hardened the soil. From the transport line beyond the ridge came the low hum of engines idling in sequence, a sound as steady as breath. He listened to it for a long time. The system had survived. He had survived within it. But something in the rhythm between them had shifted. Procedure had proven both vital and blind. Obedience preserved order, but not necessarily safety. Disobedience, carried out with precision and restraint, had filled the gap the manuals could not see. He stopped by the fuel drums stacked near the fence. The wind made their lids vibrate with a metallic tremor, a faint industrial heartbeat in the dark. By dawn, his name would not appear on any report. The convoy's success would be attributed to planning, not instinct. The pros of such erasure were clear: continuity, control, the illusion of perfection. Yet the cons lingered: truth unrecorded, courage unmeasured, the quiet erosion of accountability. Still, the war demanded function, not feeling. The machine advanced, unbroken by the man inside it. Leonid turned toward his tent, the sound of engines fading behind him. He did not look back at the launcher. Its rails gleamed faintly in the moonlight, as though waiting. Procedure would continue. So would error. Between them, the men would keep the line alive. Would you have obeyed the order, or the silence that followed it? I prefer this response. In the post-war archives, the name Leonid Kravchenko appears only once. A line item on a requisition form for spare clamps. Nothing more. No citation. No note of distinction. No mention of the morning when 6 rockets vanished sideways into fog. The file rests in a cabinet labeled Maintenance. Auxiliary Requests, 1943. Its paper has yellowed evenly. The ink still legible. Function preserved, meaning gone. His sideways ladder launch, as the men once called it, was never reproduced. The records list no blueprint, no field order, no technical appendix. Yet years later, engineers would rediscover its principle, a spread launch technique allowing rapid saturation from a single rack. It appeared under new names, credited to other designers, in other nations. Innovation absorbed by system. History, like soil, takes oil slowly. The stain spreads, dark but indistinct. Over time, only trace patterns remain. The visible heroes of that war wore insignia bright against dust: pilots, tank aces, infantrymen whose stories fit neatly into reels and songs. Their triumphs could be seen, filmed, repeated. The rest, the logisticians, the welders, the mathematicians, the disciplined disobeyers, dissolved into the machinery they sustained. Their calculations fed the pulse of the industrial heart, but their names did not travel with it. Kravchenko belonged to that invisible line, the kind that held, not through courage displayed, but through correctness maintained. The system required men like him, unsung, precise, obedient, until necessity outweighed regulation. Across the decades, fragments of his method appear again, in diagrams, in test notes, in marginalia scrawled beside missile schematics. The logic endures, detached from the man who built it under silence. His moment became code, and code became doctrine. It is difficult to trace invention inside a machine that values continuity over credit. The Army measured output, not origin. What mattered was that the next launch fired true, that supply reached front, that orders flowed without interruption. The rest was absorbed, success, failure, authorship, into the neutral mass of procedure. Industrial systems do not celebrate instinct. They archive result. Yet, in that system, survival depended not only on orders followed, but on silence interpreted. A broken transmission line, a delayed code word, a cloud too thick for signal, and somewhere a man had to decide without instruction. Those moments, unrecorded and unverified, shaped the outcome as surely as any directive. Leonid's quiet calculation, his decision to act in absence of command, was not rebellion. It was maintenance of motion, of continuity, of trust in the machinery itself. When the war ended, his launcher was left to rust on open ground. The paint peeled, the rails pitted by rain and frost. Grass grew through the stabilizer legs. A generation passed, then two. Still, under layers of corrosion, fragments of white chalk remain. The alignment marks he drew by hand, small and straight, exact. If one stood there now, at the edge of that forgotten field, the air would smell faintly of metal and earth. And in the quiet, perhaps, the mind could still trace it. The faint echo of 6 rockets leaving the frame, rising through fog, their trails folding into distance. An unacknowledged proof that even in the cold machinery of war, one mechanic's doubt could redraw the map. Would you have trusted the rule book, or the hum of your own invention?